What's going on, Salt Strong Nation? Today I want to talk to you guys about one of my favorite strategies for catching a lot of redfish in the winter. Now this is the time of year that I really like to go after reds because I can almost catch them like they're in a barrel. You're going to catch one fish after the other if you employ this strategy and you put a lot of time into your pre-plan and you know how to execute it properly. So I'm going to cover everything that you guys need to know in this video to catch a lot of redfish in the winter time. So for this type of trip to work out, you really have to plan it around the conditions. And what I'm specifically looking for when I'm going to catch a lot of redfish in the wintertime is a day where there's really high winds, so 10 to 15 miles an hour. That's pretty high for me in my kayak, and a good outgoing tide. And what I'm really specifically looking for is a negative tide. So that's when that outgoing tide drops below sea level, and you're gonna end up with a lot of flats that are completely dry at low tide. And what I really wanna find is all of those deep pockets on the flats, or those channels that run through them that are a little bit deeper. And the places that I really like the most are the ones that have a little bit of wind protection on them. So really what I like to look for is creek mouths that are a little bit deeper on a shallow flat. When all of these creeks dump out and those flats dry up, those fish are going to be looking for somewhere they can have a good stable temperature, and they're not going to be sitting in a couple inches of water that just happens to still be there from the outgoing tide. They're going to look for a nice deep hole that's got some stable temperature down at that deep bottom. It's going to be a little bit warmer than it would be at the surface, especially on a windy day like we've talked about planning around. So that's exactly where you're going to find those fish. Look for those deep holes at the entrances to the flats. The creek mouths that go off into some of the smaller feeder creeks, all of these areas are high probability zones to find really big schools of redfish tucked up in, waiting for that tide to rise back again. And another note on being efficient with your time, it's extremely important that we plan to hit several different holes, because it's very likely that the entire school is just going to sit in just one of these areas. So if you've got an entire flat that you know there's activity from redfish on at a high tide, you need to plan that they all have possibly dropped into one of those possible holes. So don't spend more than 10 or 15 minutes at one single hole. Plan to hit 4 or 5 different ones. And if you're not seeing activity in those 10-15 minutes, trust me, when you put a line in a hole that's got 40 or 50 redfish in it, they're very likely going to bite. So you need to continue to bounce between each of those until you find the school. And once you've found them, you can really hit them hard. Now that does bring us to our next subject. What bait are you going to be using to hammer these schools of winter reds? And there's really 3 main baits that I like to use. The first of which is a mirror lure. Again, this is kind of a big bait fish imitation. If you've still got a lot of big bait fish around, I would highly recommend you use these. And these excel in these holes because, again, these reds are very lethargic. It's the winter time. They don't have a lot of energy to chase down bait, but there's typically still going to be a little bit of bait fish around, so they're not going to turn it down. And these are awesome because you can fish them really slow and let them kind of sit right in those redfish's face and just wait for them to strike. Give them all the opportunity that they need, and you're going to be able to efficiently cover that hole and basically just let the current kind of swing that bait through the hole. There's typically still going to be a little bit of current moving even in a small hole like that, and those fish definitely will take you up on these mirror lures. I've caught a lot of reds on these, and they're just extremely effective. Now in terms of color, I'm not really picky. I do like to have a little bit of flash because typically these holes are going to be in the coastal marsh region, so you've got some dirty water. So some gold or some silver flash, as you can see, this would be a good one here. I'm not too picky on the actual colors that are on the back. I just like to have some sort of foil that is on the sides of these that's going to make it have a little bit of flash when it's in that dark, murky water. Now, the second bait that I like to use if the redfish are a little bit more active or they're looking for a little bit more of a lively presentation is just a paddle tail. And this is the Slam Shady paddle tail here. I've got it on the Berkeley Fusion 19 jig head, but this is extremely effective as well. A lot of the big redfish will go for these, and really what separates it from the mirror lure is if the water's really, really murky, you've got this paddle tail that's going to be creating a lot of vibration, and the fish really will dial in on that, especially if that's a really deep hole and there's not a lot of light that's getting to the bottom and they're having difficulty finding that lure. So if you find the mirror lure is a little bit too subtle of a presentation, I would highly recommend that you toss out this paddle tail because it's very likely they will take you up on it if you give it a toss. Now there is still one bait that I like to use outside of the mirror lure and the paddle tail. If you find that the fish are really not dialed in on actual bait fish patterns, I highly recommend that you throw some sort of artificial shrimp. Now what I have in front of me is the Chase Baits Flick Prawn, and it's an awesome bait. Again, it's kind of expensive, so I've experimented with tons of different artificial shrimp imitations. I've used the gulp shrimp, they work just fine, as well as some of the voodoo and DOA shrimp. I've had a lot of success recently with the voodoo shrimp. In fact, I did test them out recently recently. If you'd like to see the results of that video, I will link it in the description below, but you are going to see some footage of it right now, and they are an awesome bait for pulling redfish out of these holes. They're extremely durable, they've got some great rattles to them, and they look really realistic even if the water's a little bit clearer. But really the only time I'm going to pull out these shrimp imitations if I'm seeing a lot of shrimp in the water like I have the past couple of weeks, or if I just find that they're not too dialed in on bait fish imitations. So now you guys know where to find these fish, what conditions you're going to find them under, and what to throw so you can have the maximum success with them. But if you would like to see this done on the water live with some more advanced tips that I'm not going to be sharing in this video, I highly recommend you join us in the Salt Strong Insider Club, where we give weekly on the water reports, exclusive courses and lessons, a network of tens of thousands of insider anglers, and up to 20% off of the industry's best rods, reels, lures, and other gear. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the Salt Strong Insider Club, and thanks again so much for watching.